What's going on, everybody? It's Azazel, and yes, I have finally decided to put out my first Azazel Reviews video. I'm going to start out this week reviewing my favorite movie of all time, The Exorcist. Now, before I get into it, let me explain what my goals are with this series. First and foremost, I love movies. It's one of my favorite things to do, is watch movies. I get into them really deep. You know, I pay a lot of attention to detail and things with movies. You know, I'll pay attention to actors and actresses in it, and, you know, connect the dots, and directors, and all that. I'm a real big film buff. Now, why I want to talk about The Exorcist first is because it is my favorite movie. And what I want you guys to do, because I want this to incorporate you. I want you guys to comment with your favorite movie down below, and I might review it. Alright, I'm not really decided 100% how I'm going to do future episodes of this. I have a few ideas of movies I want to go ahead and review and get out of the way. But I want to involve you guys. So maybe I'll put a voting process. Maybe I'll have a selection of movies, and I'll have some, you know, have you guys vote in the comments on which movie I'm going to review next. Until then, I'll just pick a couple right now. Maybe I'll pick one from the comments until I really figure it out. But let's go ahead and get started. So The Exorcist is, of course, a horror movie that was released in 1973. It was directed by William Friedkin, based upon a book by William Peter Blatty, which, actually, I didn't even read that book until like 6 months ago. And I'm a pretty big reader, too, so I've always been kind of shocked. I read the sequel to The Exorcist, which was called Legion, and I read that when I was about 13 or 14. And I actually just recently repurchased that so that I can read it because it's been a very long time since I've read it. The movie stars Linda Blair as Regan McNeil, and she is, of course, you know, the role that everybody knows. She's the little girl who ends up being possessed by the devil. It also stars Max von Sydow as Father Merrin, one of the heroes of the story, as well as Jason Miller as Father Damien Karras. There are tons and tons and tons of quotable lines from this movie.
Your mother sucks cocks in hell, Karras.
And that's one of the reasons that I've always liked it. But I'll get to why I really loved it. Whenever I was a kid, my mother used to let me watch horror movies. And she used to let me watch horror movies that were well outside the scope of what would be considered okay for kids to fucking watch. I was like 6 years old when I watched The Exorcist. And at 6 years old, this movie will pucker your fucking asshole. It scared the shit out of me. Right, now this has been 25 years ago, of course, but it scared the fucking shit out of me. And I've still never fully recovered. It's one of the very few horror movies that to this day, even as an adult, has genuinely frightened me. Now, I can watch the movie now and just love it as a film, but back when I was a kid when I watched it, and I would watch it whenever it came on TV, because even though this is an incredibly graphic movie, especially when it comes to language, it was on TV all the time. So basically, here's what happened. Young Regan McNeil, she's about 12 years old. Her mother is an actress, and she's starring in a movie that's being filmed near D.C. in Georgetown. And Regan ends up being possessed by the devil. I'm going to keep it very simple, and I'm just going to, you know, so maybe get you guys interested. If you haven't seen this movie, it's 40 years old. It has aged very well. But this movie is about 40 years old and is still really, really good. So Regan ends up being possessed, and she goes through all of this stuff that, you know, normal modern-day people would go through if something like this were to happen. And that is going to see every doctor under the fucking sun, every psychiatrist under the fucking sun, and no one can do anything, and no one can figure anything out. This poor girl is just being tortured. Crazy things are happening. Her head's spinning the fucking round. She's puking everywhere. Their beds are shaking. She's floating. There's a bunch of crazy stuff. So finally, Regan's mother, played by Ellen Burstyn, contacts the local diocese. She gets in touch with a priest and wants to get him to perform an exorcism. Now, this priest is actually very low on faith. He's had his buttons pushed enough by God, so to speak. And he doesn't want to do the exorcism at first because he feels like there's probably a psychological reason for this happening, and Regan needs to see more psychiatrists. Now, he's also a psychiatrist as well as a priest, so that's kind of why they end up wanting to get him on the side of doing the exorcism. So, first, you know, worst comes to worst, and then they end up having to do the exorcism. And the exorcism scene, just to give you guys a little bit of a heads up, you know, that the whole movie is a build-up. I miss old-school horror like this, where the whole movie is a setup for some final battle between good and evil. And there's very few horror movies that still do this, and even fewer that do it correctly, that do it right, to make it feel like the movie is scary. And finally, there's a battle between good and evil. And what I would say as far as a final rating goes, and then I'm going to give you guys a couple of fun facts about this movie, is on a star rating of 1 to 5, I would say, given modern times, I'd get this at about 4 stars. It's not one of the greatest movies in the world, but considering its time, 40 years that it has aged, and it can still be watched and enjoyed by many people. Whereas if I go back and watch kids' movies that I used to love back in the 80s or 90s, they're fucking terrible. They are unwatchable pieces of fuckery. Whereas The Exorcist is fantastic. This is not a movie meant for children at all. There's tons of cursing, tons of swearing, there's violence, there's murder. There's a lot of very graphic things that happen. I wouldn't recommend letting young children watch it if you've never seen this before. If you have seen it and you hate this movie, you're going to make me cry, and I don't know if we can be friends. And I want to give you guys a couple of fun facts, some things that I found out after talking about this movie and doing a little research. The director of the movie, William Friedkin, was actually seen as a total fucking asshole. He would do crazy things to the actors to get them to get better responses out of them, and I guess it worked. This movie is considered the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. He would shoot guns behind people's heads while they were reading their lines during the shot, you know, to get better reactions out of them so they would look more frightened. Some of the stunts that were done in the movie, for example, Linda Blair being bounced up and down on the bed, and she kind of flies through the air and slams onto the bed, was a stunt that was done very poorly, and she still has back problems to this day, and the woman is in her 50s now. The same type of thing also happened to her mother, or the lady who played her mother, Ellen Burstyn, where there was actually, like, she was yanked using a harness and it hurt her back. But probably one of the craziest things about the movie is that if you watch the movie with Max von Sydow as Father Merrin is supposed to be a much, much older priest. He is supposed to be very aged and weathered and just very old. He was only about 44 years old when this movie was filmed. He wasn't much older than the actor Jason Miller, who played Father Karras. They added a lot of makeup to Father Merrin to make him look very old, which the makeup is done very well, even though there is a spot close to the end of the movie where you can see where the makeup is beginning to kind of look bad. But besides that, I highly recommend this movie. It is just my favorite movie of all time, one of the best movies in my opinion of all times. Back in the 70s, film was really, really getting big. And that's pretty much all I got for you. So please share your thoughts about this movie down below. If you haven't seen it, give it a try. Let me know what you think when you do watch it. And just share, guys. And comment what your favorite movie is down below. Maybe I'll pick it and we'll review it sometime in the near future. I do appreciate you guys watching. I know it's been a longer video. I'll try to make them a little bit shorter so everybody will stick around. So you guys take it easy. It's been Azazel. Enjoy the movies.